So, continuing with our split history of the civil rights movement, now we're looking at the segregationist perspective. Remember, a segregationist are those that believed that the races needed to be separate. So this is their perspective. Chapter 1, Trouble Stirring. Black Monday. To Southern segregationists, that was how May 17, 1954 would be remembered. On that day, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that African American children had a constitutional right to attend school with white children. Most Southern whites reacted with shock, defiance, and fear. Their congressmen banged their fists and shouted with rage from the halls of government. Southern governors promised to shut down schools rather than see them integrated. After Brown, men in white hoods packed Ku Klux Klan rallies. The hate group took violent revenge on black citizens they perceived as uppity. Any black man who tried to register to vote or who looked a white woman in the eye was a target for lynching. The Brown decision also spurred a new kind of hate group. While poor rural men flocked to Klan rituals, businessmen filled the roles at white citizens' council meetings. These white-collar Klansmen attacked with economic weapons. They might, for example, arrange for a black man who tried to enroll his child at a white school to be fired, or he might have his rent raised. Our way of life. With violence and economic punishments, many Southern whites intimidated blacks into keeping their proper place. But they also had two other powerful weapons, law and custom. Jim Crow laws segregated public spaces. Southern whites and blacks drank from different water fountains, traveled separately, and dined in different restaurants. Custom indicated that a black man never looked a white woman in the eye. Both law and custom kept blacks away from voting booths and the institutions of power. To many white Southerners, the Brown decision was an attack on a way of life they had enjoyed for 300 years. Generations of white Southerners had grown up believing that African Americans were inferior. Their interpretation of the Bible and their ideas about race justified these deeply held views. And now, all of a sudden, change was being imposed from outside, from Northerners who had ignored racial inequality in the South for decades. Many Southerners heard echoes of the Civil War defeat ringing in the Supreme Court's decree. But another practical matter was at stake. If black and white children sat side by side at school, they might grow up thinking of themselves as equals. That could lead to blacks and whites marrying and having children together. And this was the most feared of all Southern taboos. Agitators in Montgomery. Many whites in Montgomery, Alabama were shaking their heads in disbelief in December 1955. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old black woman, had broken the law by refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a crowded bus. 4 days later, on December 5th, the buses in Montgomery were practically empty. The black community was boycotting the buses, and a young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. was leading their raucous meetings. Most whites believed that King, a newcomer, had no business causing trouble in their town. A boycott was bad news for the bus company, which relied mostly on fares from black riders. But Mayor W.A. Tacky Gale wasn't worried. "Comes the first rainy day and the Negroes will be back on the buses," he said. But as days, weeks, and then months passed, Gale and others had to admit that the boycott was not going away. In fact, the activists had increased their demands. Now they were calling for complete desegregation of city buses. A fight was on, and city officials could not risk a black victory. If blacks won this time, what would they ask for next? By November 1956, after 11 months, Montgomery had lost about $1 million to the boycott. That month, the USS Supreme Court ordered Montgomery to desegregate its buses. Montgomery's white rulers had not given in, but they had been defeated. Chapter 2. We are occupied territory. Authorine Lucy prompted an angry white mob when she tried to break the color barrier at the University of Alabama in February 1956. Soon after Lucy was expelled for accusing Universal officials of not keeping order, Lucy's case showed that mob violence did indeed block integration. Segregationists also took note that President Dwight Eisenhower had not used federal might to enforce the Brown ruling and ensure Lucy's attendance. The following year, however, Brown would be tested again with a far different outcome. Orville Faubus's political gamble. Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus worried that his soft stance on race was becoming a political hazard. Faubus had presided over the integration of colleges in his home state, but now, in 1957, with elections coming up, polls were showing that Faubus would have to harden his stance to stay in office. That summer, Faubus saw his chance with a case at Little Rock Central High School. Little Rock city officials were already doing what they could to encourage integration. New laws required black students to fill out extra paperwork to attend an all-white school. Local parents even organized a phone drive. Volunteers telephoned black parents to talk them out of risking their children's safety by sending them to an all-white schools. Southern Manifesto. 101 Southern members of the U.S. Congress took a defiant stand against the Brown decision on segregated schools in March 1956. Representing every state of the former Confederacy, the congressmen signed a document now known as the Southern Manifesto. The document called the Brown ruling a clear abuse of judicial power that trampled states' cherished rights. It warned of the chaos and confusion that would result from such unlawful policy. In later decades, having signed the Southern Manifesto became a mark of shame on a Southern politician's career. The actions were backed up by the threat of violence. Angry whites sent a rock flying through the living room window of Daisy Bates, the activist who was spearheading integration efforts. A note tied to the rock warned, "Stone this time, dynamite next." By the end of August, the list of about 75 black teenagers who had signed up for Central High had been pared down to just 9. Governor Faubus introduced another tactic September 2nd. He appeared on TV warning of coming mayhem should integration go forward. He announced that he was sending National Guardsmen to Little Rock to maintain order. On September 4th, however, the soldiers' true mission was revealed. That day, the soldiers physically prevented the 9 black teenagers from passing through school doors. For the first time since the Civil War, a state had blocked the will of the federal government. An angry mob prevented the Little Rock 9 from attending Central High again on September 23rd. Despite President Eisenhower's urgings, Faubus would not protect the students. Finally, on September 24th, Eisenhower reluctantly sent in federal troops to escort the black students into the school. People around the nation watched as soldiers in helicopters and armed jeeps did what Faubus had refused to do. "We are now in occupied territory," Faubus defiantly cried. The next year, Faubus closed high schools in Little Rock entirely, rather than see black and white students mix. He also won his 3rd term as governor by a landslide. A Gallup poll in late 1958 named Faubus one of the 10 most admired men in America. Across the South, Southern politicians took notice. Orville Faubus's political gamble had paid off. Chapter 3. Retaliation and Intimidation. Business owners in Nashville, Tennessee were starting to get desperate in the spring of 1960. The sit-in movement that had spread across the South was especially strong in their city. The trouble had begun the previous winter. About 200 black students had refused to budge from whites-only lunch counters in downtown department stores on February 18th. At first, segregationists claimed that sit-ins were just the latest college fad. The black students were looking for publicity and were getting plenty of it. Business owners responded mostly by ignoring the protest. Some managers roped off their lunch counters entirely. while others pressured local colleges to expel the activists. But as the sit-ins continued, angry whites began attacking the black students. Crowded paddy wagons rolled down Nashville streets as police arrested the students on charges such as trespassing or disturbing the peace. Soon, white customers were afraid to shop downtown, while black customers refused to spend their money at the segregated stores. In desperation, business owners proposed opening black sections at the lunch counters, but the activists refused the offer. They wanted nothing less than full integration. Then on April 19th, angry whites bombed the home of one of the city's prominent black lawyers. That same day, Nashville citizens looked on in astonishment as a crowd of 2,500 activists silently marched to Nashville City Hall. Mayor Ben West was waiting for them on the building's steps. One protester asked him about his personal beliefs on the sit-ins. West looked into the thousands of expectant faces. "I found that I had to answer it frankly and honestly," he later recalled. "I did not agree that it was morally right for someone to sell them merchandise and refuse them service." Privately, Nashville business owners breathed a sigh of relief. Less than a month later, lunch counters were opened up to black customers. The struggling stores could get back to business while Mayor West shouldered the blame. Mob rule. Just as the sit-ins were winding down, new trouble cropped up in the South. Civil rights workers were staging freedom rides to defy segregation's rules on interstate buses and bus terminals. The freedom rides introduced a new twist. Here came white activists to sing songs in the back of the bus and walk brazenly into, quote, colored facilities. That was more than some whites could abide. A mob of Klansmen was waiting for a freedom ride bus in Birmingham, Alabama, the afternoon of May 14, 1961. Eugene Bull Connor, the city's public safety commissioner, had promised the Klan a full 15 minutes to attack the riders before officers would break up the fray. As riders stepped off the bus, Klan members clubbed and whipped them with bats, pipes, and bicycle chains. Connor and the Klansmen had expected the attack to end the bus tour, but new riders were coming to Birmingham to continue it. The matter was now in the hands of Governor John Patterson. The freedom rides were gathering international media attention. President John F. Kennedy's administration was pressuring the governor to protect the riders and diffuse the embarrassing situation as quietly as possible. That enraged Patterson. In his view, the president should be working to stop the real troublemakers, the freedom riders themselves. For several days, Patterson simply refused to return the president's phone calls. Finally, the governor issued a vague statement about protecting all people on Alabama's highways. State troopers escorted the freedom riders out of Birmingham on May 20th. However, as the buses closed in on Montgomery, the patrol cars suddenly disappeared. A waiting Klansman in Montgomery freely carried out another attack on the riders. The Kennedy administration felt tricked by Patterson. It immediately sent in U.S. Marshals to restore order in Montgomery. Ever defiant, Patterson told reporters, "Now the federal government comes in here and illegally interferes in a domestic situation they themselves helped to create." The freedom riders left Alabama, accompanied by planes, helicopters, and police cars, on May 24th. The freedom rides continued without another attack that summer. In the fall, a federal ruling outlawed segregation on interstate buses and terminals. Mob rule had failed as a segregationist strategy.